Hello, everyone. My name is Dave Mormon, and I'm here to give a webinar on business continuity planning, data backup, business continuity, and disaster recovery. I'm gonna go over a whole host of topics, but try to keep it quick, concise, and keep a good operational tempo to this thing. But thank you all for joining us today for another Business Tech Talk sessions. My name again is David Mormon, and I'm the host today. I'll be presenting today's webinar. For those of you joining us for the first time, Business Tech Talks is a webinar series sponsored by a group of nationally recognized managed service providers. It's basically a group of a bunch of us friends that all own IT companies all over the U.S. All of our members provide, comprehensive network management and IT support solutions in different regions, again, across the U.S. Our goal is to further educate business executives, decision makers, and IT professionals about key business topics related to technology, and to share our industry knowledge and best practices and promote business innovation, growth, and success. At any time during this webinar, feel free to submit your questions. I have some time at the end of it to answer those, and I'll circle back and get those answered for you. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's see here. So again, there's four of us, IT service companies: Acropolis in St. Louis, Chips out of New York, IT Solutions out of Philadelphia, and Dynasis, we're located in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm the president and founder of Dynasis Integrated Systems. I founded the company 25 years ago and been doing this ever since. That's all I know, so that's why I keep doing it. I live up here in North Atlanta in Milton, Georgia, with my wife and two kids. So far in my career, 25 years into this, I've witnessed multiple times where there's been physical theft of servers and data storage. I've seen 50 episodes of cyber terrorism, multiple instances of fire and complete buildings burning down. I've seen a couple of tornadoes, not too many of those up here, but I've seen a couple over 25 years. A couple of hurricanes, especially with a couple of our clients down in South Florida with Irma just hitting down there last week. And then also flooding, most in this area, mostly because of, building maintenance issues. And these aren't to scare anybody out there, but I just want you to know these things actually do happen, some more than others. But what we're talking about today is protecting yourself against these kind of events. So today, we're going to be talking about data backup. I'm going to cover business continuity and what that means, disaster recovery as a service, and then data archiving. Data backup seems like a simple topic, but when it comes to a service provider and delivering on the requirements of our customers, it gets a little bit more complex. So I don't know if you guys remember the $6 Million Man, but Steve Austin was an astronaut, a man barely alive. We can rebuild him. We have the technology. In the event of data loss or cyber terrorism, we can rebuild your network. I tell our customers all the time, I can rebuild your network for free. We have the technology, but we can't rebuild your data. That's the one asset that we cannot rebuild. So we're going to look at a couple different situations and scenarios. One is what I call data loss and ransomware. This could be a user deletes some files, data gets corrupted because of a RAID failure, or cyber terrorism and ransomware, and that's where we would look to a data backup and restore system. We're going to look at hardware and software failures. So this could be a blue screen of a server, a physical server, a virtual server, any kind of a server crash. So I'm going to put this in a bucket of what I call business continuity. And then also site failure and geographic failure. So this would be anything from a physical site, from fires, tornadoes, theft, floods, hurricanes, or earthquakes. And that could be local, or like I said, in a geographic area, like what happened in South Florida last week. And we're going to look at that as a disaster recovery, and then / disaster recovery as a service. So if you are a business and want to mitigate risk through business continuity and disaster recovery planning, how would you begin? What do you need to prepare for? A data backup, business continuity, and disaster recovery assessment is pretty much the best way to determine your risks and figure out how you would address those in the future. And if you don't have the resources or expertise to complete an assessment, this seminar is pretty much for you and why we developed it. So the challenge that all of us have is, as time goes on and every year passes by, data continues to grow. Within the last 10 years, things like images and PDF files and Photoshop files, the file size have gotten bigger, the amount of users creating those files have increased, and data basically doubles. In our client base, I bet 65 to 70% of our customers' data doubles every year. So as data continues to grow, how do we get our arms around being able to manage data and be able to protect it, store it, and archive it effectively for our business, right? And also to meet business requirements. I actually came up with the term, that data has gravity. A good example of that is we have a new client that a couple years ago got ransomware. They had 10 terabytes of data, and to unencrypt or restore 10 terabytes of data is a big task. And you have to have the right tools in place, the right software systems and restore systems to be able to do that in an effective manner. So, their data's gotten pretty large. We have clients that have, 50 terabytes and 100 terabytes. But the bigger this kind of footprint gets of your data, the harder it gets to back up and restore. So why backup data? We covered some of these, but server crashes, human error, natural disaster, man-made, malware, malicious activity, theft, insurance requirements, and legal requirements. So what we like to employ is what we call a 3-2-1 backup strategy. So as a minimum, we recommend that you have 3 backups of your data, right? We'll have one, which is your on-site production data, which is essentially what I think of as a living organism of your data. It's constantly changing. You want to have an on-site backup of that data, and we're going to talk a minute about RTO and RPOs and what that means. But then you want to make sure you have a set of that data off-site on a nightly basis or an hourly basis in case that you had a physical catastrophe. You have it, we consider your data as kind of as valuable as gold, and we just want to make sure that we have a copy of that off-site in case it's needed. So there's different types of data backups I want to talk about. One is a full backup. Most people are probably up to speed on what that means, but there's also differential backups, incremental backups, synthetic full backups, and incremental forever backups. So a full backup is basically what it implies. It backs up everything all at once when that backup happens. The reason why a lot of companies don't do a full backup every single night is it takes a long time to back up, and it uses a lot of disk space, so you have to have plenty of storage to do that. A differential backup backups basically any changes to the last full backup, and it takes longer to back up, but it's pretty quick to restore. An incremental backup is the same as a differential backup, but it takes shorter to back up, so it's quicker, but then it would take longer to restore if you needed some of those files. And then in synthetic backup, which basically backs up everything in a chain and rolls it up, but makes it indistinguishable from a full backup, which is some of the more advanced backup jobs that are out there today. And then you have an incremental forever, or even in some cases a synthetic incremental forever, which basically means we can go back at any point in time and see what was. So as the data changes and grows and it's dynamic, and it's this living organism, as I like to think of it, we could go back 5 days, 10 days, 2 weeks to any point in time. So those are different types of data backup jobs that we'll be talking about a little bit. But I like to cover real quick, in the last probably 5 to 7 years, backup technology is really advanced, and it's done that because of virtualization. So now that everything is becoming virtualized, or an easier definition of that would be software-based, it's a lot easier to manage and manipulate the software than it was in the old days when we were dealing with hardware devices. So now that even, applications, server storage, and even network virtualization is coming into play, this virtualization technology has given us a lot of options and a lot of flexibility on how we go ahead to doing daily data backups, how we deliver business continuity and disaster recovery. It's also driven down the cost to do these things tremendously, and now it's pretty affordable to do all of it. So why virtualization for backups, continuity, and recovery? Again, I just talked about that. It's virtualization is software-based, but now we can do 15-minute to hourly backups since everything's software-based. Of course, you need to make sure you have enough compute and storage to do that, and network speed. But we can also back up the virtual servers in native server hypervisor formats. That basically just means that if we back up a VMware virtual server or a Hyper-V virtual server, we can actually then just boot that image up, which is great for business continuity. But also, if we needed to restore, and maybe we had an old server on the shelf, we can actually restore a server to agnostic hardware platforms, which is great, so we don't need matching hardware, which has always been a challenge for service providers and internal IT departments. And overall, it's just a better data protection solution. So let's talk about RTO, or what we call recovery, or your recovery time objective. So this is the time it will take to recover your data during an outage. How long can you afford to not have access to your data? Is it a day, an hour, 15 minutes, or not at all? We're not going to really talk about not at all today. I mean, that's a whole separate presentation on high availability and fault tolerance, which is something that all of us can do. But inherently, when you create multiple redundant systems, you increase cost and complexity. So today we're not going to cover that, but we can get restores down to 5 minutes on what we're talking about today. So that's your RTO. Your RPO is your recovery point. So the first question is, how fast can we get back up and running? The second question is going to be, how old is the data going to be? So this is the point in which our last backup was performed, or your last backup was performed. How much data can you afford to lose? An hour of data? Again, a day? 15 minutes? Oh, I spelled that wrong. I'll go back and fix that after this presentation. Or not at all? This is another question that we have to answer. At the end of the presentation, I actually put together a worksheet that I can email anybody that you can actually answer these questions, because they're going to be different for an equipment failure or software failure versus site failure. But I created a worksheet that everybody could fill out. So when it comes to these two factors, they basically are dictated by your budget and your business requirements. So one of the things we want to do first is establish a data retention policy. So what is this? This is basically, how long do we want to keep the data? We have customers that want to keep the data for 30 days and they only need to go back 3 weeks. And then we have customers that need to go back 7 years. If they're in the financial services industry, government compliance dictates that they need to go back that far. So once we figure out how far we need to go back, we can do a few different things. And a lot of these are going to be based on your operational needs, legal requirements, compliance if you're in financial services or in medical industry, insurance requirements, what does your insurance policy dictate, or just what we call personal feelings. Every business owner I talk to has a different feeling on how long they want to keep their data. And the overall goal is to organize and save the information so it can be searched and accessed later in a reliable, quick way. And then let's talk about data backup capacity planning. So data backup capacity planning is making sure that we have enough backup storage in place to back up all the data in the intervals and the format that we want to back them up. Our standard recommendation is 4 times your current data footprint. That basically means if you have 2 terabytes of data, you would want 8 terabytes of free backup storage data. Or if you had 10 terabytes of data, you'd want probably 40 terabytes of free available space to be able to do your backups to. But some of these, these are just recommendations, but they can change based on things like, the rate of the data change, backup file compression, backup frequency, and even the backup application you use. But 4 times, I feel, in my opinion, doing this a few years is a really good number that you could use to make sure you're safe. So let's talk about business continuity and disaster recovery now. And I know I'm going through this at a good clip. I'll be more than happy to send this presentation to anybody afterwards. I'll give you my email address and get that out if you'd like it. But I just want to be conscious of your time. So business continuity is the capability of an organization to continually deliver their products and services at acceptable predefined levels following a disruptive incident. So basically that means you have a server crash or multiple server crash, how fast can we get back up and running? So that's what I call business continuity, and what the industry calls it, I should say. It's about taking responsibility for your business and building and improving its resilience and availability. We want to be able to recover, quickly and effectively from any type of disruption, whatever its size or cause. And business continuity gives you a solid solution to lean on in times of crisis and provides stability and security. And it does this for your family, your employees, your customers, investors, and lenders. So it's basically wanting to create the highest level of what I would call, just availability, or the 5 nines, 99.999% availability for your organization. Some of the benefits of business continuity, and there's many more than I listed here today, but minimize the effect on the organization of disruption on the organization, reduce the risk of financial loss, be able to retain the company brand and image to your clients and your employees, be able to really recover mission-critical systems within agreed short time frame. Again, to meet legal and compliance requirements, some of this might be dictated to your organization by the government, and to maximize overall availability, because what we find when customers have a really high level of availability, it lowers their overall cost of their IT operations and increases productivity for all the employees in your organization. And that's one of the 4 key drivers we like to talk about at Dynasis. So now we'll talk about a little bit about disaster recovery. So disaster recovery is basically the policies, procedures, and tools that give you the ability to recover in a disaster event. So this could be human-induced, like cyber terrorism, or an employee accidentally deleting everything on the end drive because they didn't have their permissions locked down. Or it could be from a natural disaster. I mean, we've seen here in Atlanta in 25 years, I've seen multiple fires, or even flooding. See flooding more than anything else, where a pipe bursts in the server room and it tears the servers down, and basically they're destroyed and the RAIDs are destroyed, and we need to be able to restore from an off-site backup. So some of the key objectives, and again, we'll talk about this more on the worksheet, but for disaster recovery, just like data backup, we want to make sure we define what our recovery point is, what our recovery time is going to be. We want to make sure it's reliable, it performs, so when we need it, it's there. We want to, in a lot of instances, have geo-separation. That could be either physically or regionally. And then, make sure we have a cold backup site. So this can be a secondary or tertiary data center, to where if we had to, in a catastrophic event, be able to spin up those servers and have the employees go home or to a third-party location and be able to dial in and work effectively. So one of the things to consider anytime we talk about disaster recovery solutions is there's 2 ways really to back up your servers off-site. One is just basically off-site backup, and a lot of businesses today have a service where they say, yeah, our data is backed up off-site, and it is. The problem you run into in most cases, and definitely ask your service provider, because a lot of times this could be an additional service, is we have your data, but we would have to build a network environment, restore that data into it to get you up and running again. The reason that's the case is because to do it the way I'm going to talk about here in a minute is the secondary way, which is more of a disaster recovery as a service type solution, takes up a lot more disk space and a lot more front-end manpower to configure the system so where it can just boot up. So most businesses basically have just a basic, what I would call a static off-site backup copy of their data. So the way you really need to do it is if you want to look at this as a off-site, like I said, disaster recovery as a service solution or in a disaster recovery environment, is to make sure that your off-site backups are set up in a way that they're what we call here at Dynasis off-site images. So this means that they can just be booted up immediately in VMware or in Microsoft Hyper-V. So that's a distinguishable difference between how service providers and internal IT departments would actually back up your data off-site. So that's a question that you definitely want to have answered if these are concerns of yours. And these two different, like I said, two different type of backups will deliver two separate different results. So what is a BDR? We use that term or that acronym a lot in our industry. Basically a BDR is an appliance, which is really at the end of the day, could be an appliance or it could be a server that has software on it that'll do all of these things that we're talking about today. So they'll do, it'll do data backup, it'll take snapshots, it'll do business continuity and disaster recovery all in one appliance. That gives us the ability to, if a virtual server went down, we could boot it up on the local BDR device within 5 to 10 minutes. It also then takes those images and then stores them off-site to an outside, like a third-party data center, a cloud service like Amazon or Microsoft Azure, or to your own physical hardware in a data center or virtual hardware in a data center. We use a product called Veeam, but there's multiple products on the market like Aperture, StorageCraft, Zerto. There's probably a good 5 to 7 really good products on the marketplace. We use Veeam because it works flawlessly, but it'll actually, for our customers, it does all of our data backups, then we replicate those backups to a BDR device, and then we take those images or that, what I call the static offsite data, and store that offsite on a minute, 15-minute basis, hourly basis, half-day or full-day basis, depending on the customer requirements. And that's what a BDR is, and something that if you don't have one of these in place today, you should ask one of your service provider what that looks like. I know all of us in this consortium provide these services to our customers. So let's talk about the cloud and disaster recovery as a service. So once the cloud developed and service providers like us came along and advanced our services, we actually now have the ability to, as opposed to you building a DR site, we have the ability to back up your data to our data centers or our data center platforms to where, in the case of an emergency, we could provide disaster recovery services to you. This would be a service that you would ask for from your service provider, and that would, we'd have to build out a solution for. It's not inherently just in, like I said, your static offsite data backups, but basically it gives us the ability to replicate everything within your physical data centers or physical computer rooms to our virtual data centers, and then that way you don't have to have a large capital investment in ongoing hardware that you have to maintain. This mitigates the amount of downtime caused by complete organizational outages, and it allows your users, like I said, to go home or to a third-party location, be able to dial in your servers and work remotely just like they were on site. And this is now affordable. 10 years ago this was really expensive to do. Now this is, in some cases under $1,000 a month, maybe even, half that, depending on the solution. And again, if you ask your service provider, they can provide you the details on this service. And some of the benefits of that, again, are having a service provider be there in case of an emergency, which is low, a small chance that some of these catastrophes are going to happen. But again, I've seen it over 25 years, multiple times, many times, and for that matter. So being able to just outsource and have that at a low cost and have to maintain less complexity is a really good solution for most small to mid-sized companies. But low overhead's a good reason why. Easy access. You can, again, access the virtual servers from anywhere, usually on any device at any time. It's fast to deploy. It's overall what we feel a better cost and pricing option. You don't have to buy any capital equipment to put on the balance sheet. You can just pay as you go as a rental or subscription type model, which overall keeps total cost of ownership low. And it's on demand, so basically when you need it, it's there. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is data archiving and what we call tape vaulting. But this is another median, for companies that have to go back 3 years, 5 years, or 7 years. You want to have some technology in place to be able to go back to that data at a point in time. So this could mean dumping it to tape. We have a service here at Dynasys where our customers back up to our data center, and if they subscribe to our tape vaulting service, we'll dump that to tape form on a quarterly basis and even store that in a media-proof safe or send it off to Iron Mountain if required. Or it could mean, putting in some hooks into your data backup and business continuity and disaster recovery solution to upload that data on a nightly, weekly, monthly, or quarterly basis to Amazon or Windows Azure. There's multiple ways to slice this onion, for lack of a better word, but just making sure that if you want to have the data 3 years ago, 7 years ago, in that kind of moment in time, you want to have a data archiving service. We see this mostly in clients that have compliance requirements for their industry, but we do have some owners that say, hey, we got sales proposals and we build buildings and we want to go back at 4 or 5 years at any point in time and pull up those proposals or those CAD projects and reuse something we did 5 years ago, and they would subscribe to a service like this. So this is a real simple version of a one-page BDR plan, backup and data recovery plan. And it's, you want to answer these questions because they're different for every one of these columns. So what's an acceptable recovery time for our organization for software failure? I mean, that's going to obviously be different than maybe a geographic or a site failure. In a lot of cases, it might take a day or 2 or 3 that if your building burned down for you to get set up somewhere else. So the requirements might be, bigger. We can wait longer if it's a catastrophe than if it's just a software or hardware failure. But what I recommend is taking this simple worksheet and filling in all of these blanks. So, what is an acceptable recovery time? What's an acceptable recovery point? How far back do you need to go, and in what time frame? Does my industry have compliance data? If it, in a lot of cases, if you have compliance restrictions, is my data, when it's backed up and it's encrypted, do I need it encrypted in transit? Do I need it encrypted at rest in the cloud? These are all questions that need to be answered, and your service provider really can't answer these for you. They can provide recommendations, of course, but ultimately I would get with the ownership group or the management team and define these exact pieces of criteria and hand this worksheet to your service provider saying, here's our business requirements. Will you make sure that our solution that's in place will meet these requirements? That's something I recommend that everybody does. And then, being able to, on the last question there, is the environment virtual, physical, or hybrid? Of course, we recommend all virtual. In some cases, that's not feasible, but there are products out there on the marketplace that will actually provide all of these services for physical servers also. And I talked a little bit about compliance through the webinar here, but here's a few different ones. Every month and year that go by, there's more and more compliance that's being generated in the business industry, but these are just a few of them. But you can Google these, or we could, if you were curious, we could provide you details on the different requirements for all the different levels of compliance based on what industry you're in. So finishing up here, I wanted to talk a little bit about common, what we see versus the ideal small business, BDR solution. Typically, we see in our customer bases and the prospects where we go and do assessments, we see that somebody has a server, they have a NAS or a inexpensive backup drive, and they say, oh yeah, we back up our data, and it's basically backed up once a night, and that's great. That's better than nothing. But you got 2 copies of your data on one physical site. So if there's a fire or a tornado, you're in big trouble. Let's say that you had a crash at 4 p.m. in the afternoon on Wednesday today. Then your last recovery point would be from the night before, and that's assuming you got a good backup. In some cases, you might have to go back 2, 3, or 4 days to make sure you had a good backup. But if you can lose 6 hours or 8 hours of work, then this might be a good solution for you. A lot of our clients are in a different situation where if somebody has 50, 100, 150, 200 employees, that's a lot of productivity loss, 6 or 8 hours worth of data loss. And then some clients do it this way, but then they have an old school tape drive they dump it to, and you hope Bob or Susie takes the tape out of the drive and brings it home every Friday, and they swap the tapes and bring them to their house. We see that a lot. And the ideal solution, you'd have your production server environment. I'm representing it here with just one server, but this could be 50 servers. You would have a BDR device that has enough storage, compute capacity to be able to back up all those VMs in whatever interval that you require, 15 minutes, an hour, half a day, at lunchtime, or even at the end of the day, based on, again, what your requirements are. So you would have 2 copies of your data, like we talked about in the 3-2-1 strategy. And then you would back that data up off-site on a routine interval. And this could be in real time, in some situations, again, by the hour, by the day, but making sure we have another copy of that data that's not too old off-site in case there's a site catastrophe. And then we recommend dumping that to tape. So we definitely recommend a 3-2-1 strategy, but if you dumped it to tape, then you'd have 4 copies of your data. Again, we believe data is gold. It's the one thing your service provider or your IT department can't rebuild. So we just believe in having multiple copies of that data because it's so valuable to businesses today. And then, again, if you have a DR facility or your service provider does and a data center, that's even better. So it's secured and has physical security and virtual security. We actually did a case study, and it's a tale of 2 different clients that we've worked with over the years. In one case, the client got Crypto Locker, which is a form of ransomware, and it encrypted all their data and encrypted all their backup data because their backup solution was architected incorrectly. That's not a solution that we built for them, of course. And that company ended up losing 90% of their data. They weren't actually able to get it back. It was very catastrophic to them. And then we have another client that has a dedicated 100 megabit bandwidth connection to our data center. They probably pay $1,200 a month for that connection, but they back up their data in real time because the data is very valuable to them. Now, they're a little bit bigger organization than the first one I shared with you, so they have a bigger budget and bigger, more sophisticated requirements. But there's many different ways to slice this and build the solution. If you fill out the BDR worksheet that I shared with you a few slides ago, your service provider can look at that and provide a solution to you to meet your needs. So that's it for today. I hope I didn't go too fast. Again, I'm more than happy to provide this presentation to you and more than happy to answer any questions if you have them. I see one here. Let me see if I can read it. So one question that came in is, as a business owner, what is my alternative to disaster recovery as a service? Can I do this myself? The answer to that is yes. There's a couple different ways to do that. One would be subscribe to a service like Windows Azure or Amazon, but then you have to provision it, you have to maintain it, and then you have to monitor it to make sure it's getting done. Another way would be to go to a small hosting company in your area, buy a hardware device like a backup server, put it in, rent some rack space, a third of a rack from them, and then back up to your own DR site. So yeah, there's definitely multiple ways to do that. See if there's any other questions. One of the questions is it as bad as we hear, or is this just hype? That's actually a pretty good question. Again, from the beginning, I am an engineer by nature, my DNA. I'm not a salesperson. You know, we've seen over the years lots of hardware and software failures. So to me, making sure you have a good business continuity solution in place, making sure you can get back up and running in a reasonable time frame, I think is the high percentage shot. Catastrophes don't happen very often in my experience, but they do happen. So it just depends on what your requirements are and what makes you sleep at night. But there is, you know, I would say cyber terrorism and ransomware is the biggest threat that we see today. And if anything, just protecting yourself from cyber threats would be a really good reason to invest a little bit of time at looking and making sure you have the right solution in place to meet your requirements. Okay, that looks like all the questions that I had. Again, let me go ahead and give you my email address, and I'll go in and shoot everybody an email also to make sure you have it and it's in your inbox. But my email address is dave.moorman, M-O-O-R-M-A-N, @dynasis.com. That's D-Y-N-A-S-I-S.com. If you want a copy of the presentation, just give me a shout, and I'll shoot it to you in email. I hope this was informative for everybody. Appreciate everybody's time, and hopefully you'll join us on the next one. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.